Hello everyone. I am really honored to be here. It was one of my deepest desires to be in Calicut. Have a lot of friends from Calicut in Hyderabad, and I'm a big fan of not only fan, I keenly follow what is happening as a social movement in Calicut. So I share the aspirations and actually political belief of the movements that happen in Calicut. My earlier interest in cinema did not happen from a young age. Right, I didn't watch many films when I grew up. Very interestingly and tragically, I went to films when I started writing a thesis, my MPhil dissertation. So it is from this distance, not so experiential mode of understanding film for the last 10 years, I want to understand what do films do to us. ஒரு படத்தை பார்க்கும்போது நம்ம என்னத்தை பார்க்குறோம்? ஒரு ஒரு ஃபில்ம் காணும்போது எதனை நாம் நோக்குன்னு அதான் பேசிக். திஸ் இஸ் த திங். வாட் டு வி see when we watch a film? அதிலிருந்து தான் this gaze. So I'm here. There's a stage set up. We all know it's set up. What do we see, right, in this set, in this stage? What is the gaze that is offered to you? That's a major thrust of my talk. If I keep talking, I'll talk. So I have written something especially for this. So I think I'll share with you. The title of this lecture, of this talk, is called, Is There a Nazi Gaze? Possibilities of I'm very particular, an oppositional look. It was a very serious film we watched just now. I just saw for the last half an hour. And I'm sure Sharif, my good friend, spoke very interesting and helped me a lot of things to open up, to move on. One of the questions you have to think, why do we lose ourselves when we watch a film? Why do we lose ourselves when we watch a film? Where are we as spectators when we watch a film? What do we watch, look, and gaze at when we watch to lose? When we watch to lose ourselves? What do we experience when time passes away over a film? Do we keep checking the watch when we watch a film? Or do we just lose ourselves when we watch a film? Do we react, enact, and act to the experience that is made possible through the film? In other words, do we gaze at what is offered, like the stage is offered to you, before us, without our own volition? Volition is our own will. Our own will. All of us know that this gaze has been industriously, it is an industry, industriously produced, directed, edited, acted, and composed. Gaze is then just a fact of cinema, one can say, just a fact of cinema. Shall we question, is it just a fact, or can it be seen as a just fact? My just means true fact. Can it be truth? Can you think of it as truth? Many scholars of cinema have problematized such facts of gaze. Many scholars. And I'm going to discuss just two modes, particularly from, the most prominent amongst them is feminist scholars themselves. Particularly feminist scholars, many of your students and some of you are interested in filmmaking. I'm sure you'd know about this male gaze and things, Laura Mulvey, So some of them, like Laura Mulvey, has argued that this gaze that is offered in cinema, popular cinema, narrative cinema, is largely a male gaze. And this male gaze objectifies women as an object of sexual desire. It is done through largely, she has three modes. People have told three things because it is only men who shoot the film. There are men, predominant presence of men behind the camera. And secondly, they are domineeringly present in the screen, as characters. So their domineering presence of male characters within the cinematic, representation. And also, lastly, interestingly, is a spectacle. What is offered? What is offered to people? That's what is the receptive presence of the spectatorship is also male. So the men who are doing it, the characters who are doing the orientation, and what is offered, what is received by, what is offered to be consumed, it is also male. It's her argument. So, and let's take it as face value and see. Does this critique take away the inevitable power or life of a gaze? We watched the last scene, no? Letters were thrown out. There's some power to this. It's making a statement. What do we read out of it? Of course, it's a male perspective. People are throwing it. But what does it mean? Does this take away the inevitable power or the life of the gaze? Can this critique, Laura Mulvey's critique particularly, adequately address how this norm can be countered? How can we counter this? Of course, it is male. How can we counter it? Does it offer something? Many a time, the power of the spectacle that the gaze offers, this spectacle that the gaze offers, that the spectator gazes, is at once consumed without even knowing. It is done unconsciously. The spectacle does something without doing anything. You just sit and we are already into it. We are consumed by that. We are into it, right? The spectacle actually does without you doing anything. By doing so, it perhaps destroys a possibility of a counter look. Okay, a possibility of a counter look. So one of the things, the second part is what are the possibilities of an oppositional look? So when we search for this, and very interestingly, there is a dialogue, there's a conversation between, if there's a feminist scholar who's doing this, there has to be a African American black woman scholar who to give another update or another counter. So it was indeed bell hooks, prominent African American feminist scholar, cultural critic. You can just check YouTube, Facebook. What's the other one? Wikipedia. She's there. Actually, she is the one who taught. There is something else we have to do about it, and she actually counters and updates and critiques. Laura Mulvey. Laura Mulvey is a very big name. 1973 was her book on narrative cinema. She studied young female black spectators. She didn't just watch films. She studied black spectators, women spectators. She went and watched with them, and studied and so. Do you see the same thing? Do you see the white gaze? She was asking. So, and actually she theorizes, what is the power of opposing this encompassing gaze by these female women, black women who are watching? She just asked, from another one, black spectator, who was also watching with her, how can black women ever occupy this object of desire when there is an overwhelming cinematic whiteness? What I see is whiteness, and how can I actually connect with this whiteness? Where am I in this gaze? That's the basic thing you're asking. She asked, in this race, race in two ways. Race, running, but race, ethnicity. In this race for desire, one just transfers without transforming. You just transform, like your ideals are given. And I have to be like this one, beauty, what is beauty, what is truth, everything is given. I'm just transferred without it transforming me. So for bell hooks, the gaze is never transformative. Thus, only an oppositional look, she says, can transform the black woman. So what is the oppositional look? Obviously, she said how these young female black women they don't mind, they tell it is all white. Not only that, she goes, what are the black women doing? Do they read these films differently? Do they make films? Do they archive films? Are there different practices? So she goes on to collect and work with them. And she gives us to study, analyze, archive, a new archive of film productions that opposes any gaze that produces any kind of cinematic whiteness. Okay? I'm just giving a platform to open my entry. What is this Nazi gaze? So if that is so, kind of a background, in the radical conversation between gender-race paradigms, particularly foregrounded by these two prominent feminists, what can Nazism or Nazis do to a gaze? In other words, can we explore what it is to gaze as a Nazi? Does a Nazi work with a gaze? Does a Nazi work with a gaze? I think much more importantly we must ask or we must state, what is a Nazi without a gaze? What is a Nazi without a gaze? We watched a film, we've been part of this film festival on Nazism. Nazism in history, as it unraveled everywhere, for me, like Nazism is a package from, from probably, from different parts of the world, as it unraveled everywhere, but particularly in Europe, destroyed many people's bare fact of life. What is that bare fact of life? That is their right to gaze, even to right to gaze at the open sky. It is to stop, deny that right to gaze at an open sky, or to have another fact of life. So can we say a Nazi gaze is a destructive gaze against any other gaze firstly, against any other look firstly? And to thrust it, it is a singular gaze of the world. It is a singular, only one gaze of the world. It is a supremacist, it is unilinear, it is militarist. I don't have to explain all this, I think. It is hierarchical, it is xenophobic, it is communal, it is racist, of course it is casteist, and it is patriarchal. It's all easy to say. Yet, it can be popular, it can be democratic, it can be socialist, nationalist, socialism. It can be nationalist, it can be communist, it can be modern, and it can be secular. Therefore, in order to work like this, Nazis cannot work but without a gaze. In order to work it out like this, Nazis cannot work but without a gaze. So it is indeed so violative, and the funny part is this, it is so violative to bear the Nazi gaze, even for somebody who is following Nazism, as it is a frozen gaze that never realizes with the fact of life in the world, which is change. It just freezes. And it has to, as in the history, it has to break down somewhere. It is a gaze that destroys any other, as it is a gaze which destroys any other possibility for other gaze. The worst is that, the tragedy is that we cannot even say that it is lifeless and therefore it is boring. Right? So then there's a very difficult part. When there are no possibilities for looking otherwise, when there's a destruction of other gazes, destruction of other visions, how can one even oppose and look back and also reject a Nazi gaze? So I have some interesting things. Can we just look away and smile at each other? What nonsense, Can we just look away and smile at each other? What nonsense is this? Can we do that? Or better still, can we just close our eyes and not gaze at all? I think these are not viable answers, Surely not. Because things are, I used to tell this in the class, you like it or not, your whole body has to change when you enter into a cinema hall, And especially when you go before watching the cinema, there's a song sung and you have to stand up. Your whole body language has to change. And this government did that. Right? Not when flag is up, but in the cinema hall. So that's not a possibility. So shouldn't we oppose by looking back? By thinking about a possibility of an oppositional look. So what are the possibilities of an oppositional look? So that we can also see other gazes. If the bearer of the Nazi gaze cannot be transformed by it, but is only objectified to be hated, defined to be excluded, and essentialized to be annihilated, to be destroyed, she is then violated by that gaze, and she is only reduced to the gaze of the other, a dominant other. Never can she co-appear and look at it as bare equal in life. Never that happens. So in order to co-appear along with the gaze, along with the spectacle, and look back, an oppositional look, for me, should be beyond a political necessity. And I want to build on what Sharif told at the end. It should be beyond a political necessity. It should become an aesthetic act that must have ethical dimensions. I build on because he tells aesthetic and politics. It should become an aesthetic act that has ethical dimensions for anyone who could bear the look. And art, as we are experiencing, is one of the most prominent modes of presenting that truth of an oppositional look. In this at once political and ethical stance, art becomes an aesthetic weapon to generate this oppositional look. Because without politics, aesthetics is never ethical. I repeat it, I have a series of statements. Because without politics, aesthetics is never ethical. And without ethics, aesthetics can never be political. And of course, without aesthetics, ethics and politics can never co-appear together. And they could be just lifeless, just chunk of text, which nobody reads. So while Laura Mulvey and bell hooks offer a critique of gaze from the gender-race problematic, shouldn't the Nazi gaze be counted even by those who are identified to occupy the normative popular, which is the white, male, whatever, whoever, Christian, European, whatever. Shouldn't they, at least them, shouldn't they reject it? Shouldn't they counter? Can we look back at the past, 1940s, past, not like fiction written in 1947 or made in 1990s. Look back at the past. Who did this popularly? And I argue like there are two white men. There were many, but I want to take two particular cases. Two white men who operated through cinema and literature, one cinema and another literature, and played with these two different kinds of games as oppositional look. Right? What we saw was an interesting 1947 novel which was made into a film. It was perhaps a political necessity because, when Israel was formed, there was judgment. You had to do court sentences that who are these Nazis. So many people started writing. Novels. They wrote, testimonies. So many people started writing. And then they told, how we were pulled in. It is very wonderfully, studied in Hannah Arendt's book, Banality of Evil, like how this is done. So I'm not going back to those things. I'm looking at within popular modes of aesthetic art practices. Were there artists who did, and particularly were there these popular normative positions, like, who are these fellows? If it's white men, if it's European, if it's Anglo-Saxonic, who are they? So interestingly, two figures came to my mind, and I've been thinking about them. How many of you watched Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator? Another mode, not serious, not realist. Great Dictator, nobody? Very less. Please do. It's available YouTube, please do. It's an interesting film. I'll start with the film because it's a popular mode of reading. Charlie Chaplin's it co-appeared along with Nazism, right? 1940 film, The Great Dictator, is one such instance of a Hollywood popular film. Okay, and it's not only memorialized today only as a satire, political satire. People say, see, he did it when Hitler was alive, and all this. But it offers something very interesting for film students. Very interesting. It is not only memorialized as a political satire that offers an oppositional look against the Nazi gaze, but it also can be summoned for history, for recording, that it was the first voiced film of Charlie Chaplin. It was he used his voice for the first time for this film. And it was an opposition against somebody who was alive and was doing was a brutal danger to the humanity. For the first time, Chaplin was making this meaning against any demeaning politics, which was creating a voice, by engaging with this film. The film, of course, one can argue is capitalist, product of a capitalist and ostensibly American, Hollywoodish, neoliberal, everything. We can just reject it. On the other hand, I just summon, can it be looked as the first dialogued, voiced film of Charlie Chaplin? And he was doing something different for the first time, and he was making his voice co-appear along with his image for radical satire. And satire, what did he do? The world now hears his voice as well and at once as a ruthless fascist dictator, and also his counter as a persecuted Jewish barber. Without ever experiencing or even knowing the true extent of the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps at the time, an oppositional look with a voice was made popular. This is in Hollywood. And this was against any brutal triumph of the Nazi will. And this indeed, for me, Chaplin's, is a rare artistic act that is at once ethical and political. It was a poetic mockery against an enslaving imperial seriousness. It's mock, you laugh. It offers a vision and a voice to move forward. In that sense, an oppositional look can be popularized, could be made possible against the lifeless Nazi gaze. But one can ask, but should the oppositional look in this form always be popular? So that's why my second example. It's another, I teach literature, and it's one of the interesting texts that I always take is Animal Farm. George Orwell, English writer, 1940s. George Orwell's most famous English, is a famous English novelist. On the other hand, at the same time, it was 1940, wrote an inspiring satire that enunciates another mode of offering an oppositional look, which was the Animal Farm. Right? He was mocking at somebody, not necessarily the Nazis, but mocking at somebody. The Animal Farm, though the novel was not appreciated in its time, everyone now knows that. What a classical signifier of resistance it became over time. It was, you will not believe, it was rejected by many publishers before it went on to become a classic, a runaway hit. And it still yields meaning. They're trying to figure, what is this? These animals trying to behave like men and men behaving like animals. What are these rules that keep changing? And what are these things that are happening? It still yields meaning. It was really, but on the other hand, it was very well known for the list of rejections for publishing that. List of rejections. I take one thing, the one famous rejection, which was by one of the famous poster boy of modern English literature. He was a poster boy. Everyone talks. The great writers wrote, thinkers write. And this poster boy of modern literature wrote on Wasteland and called it new poetry, and became very famous across the world, T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was, Englishman again, was white again, all that, was the chair of Faber and Faber, the publication house. He knows what's happening in literature. He was the director. And he rejects this as a lump of waste. He writes on Wasteland and calls it new poetry, but he calls this a waste of time. He was even Orwell's own friends, who were publishers, were reluctant to publish this book, right? But Orwell's art, I'm not going to the novel, into the text and how he did heroically did. So I'm not. But Orwell's art then particularly instructs us that we all know that England allied with Russia and others and tried to defeat Nazism, right? In that time. So, but this particular mode, this particular art, Orwell's art particularly, instructs us that not all oppositions necessarily forge the same look. They need not come together to forge the same look. That is a singular gaze. All oppositions need not be a singular gaze. Right? There could be multiple gaze. The fallacy of any totalitarian gaze, and I use inspired by Orwell, where all are equal, but some become more equal than others, can be opposed singularly and differently. Singularly and a little apart. Right? In that sense, Napoleon's Animal Farm, the fictional world of Orwell, and Henkel's Tomania, the cinematic world of Chaplin, are no different yet so different. The Nazi gaze can be opposed creatively and critically and should be looked at singularly yet as many. Unless this opposition look becomes single and many, like that of Chaplin's and Orwell's, the Nazis' overarching gaze cannot be opposed. Only by splitting, by dividing, by multiplying it, by deconstructing and reconstructing it, can a gaze affirm life. To elaborate a little bit and come to our own present and to slowly conclude, I have just 2 more written pages. As there are indeed simmering parallels, I know it was called Akhila India, Baratiya, anti-Nazi, but there are simmering parallels, simmering fear of what happened in the 1940s Europe at many places of the world, even today. Perhaps, for me, it is also to look at Hollywood cinema itself. It was most pronounced in the US even as late as today. See, for instance, when Spike Lee, the first African, Spike Lee, how many of you heard Spike Lee? Spike Lee, black American popular director who has this cult hit called Do the Right Thing. And I'm sure many people know, you can Wikipedia. But Spike Lee, I mean, obviously the first popular African guy everyone pronounced, but when he told that, I want to make a film on Malcolm X. I want to make a film on Malcolm X and no other fellow should do. And I want to do it with Denzel Washington, the popular black star. Suddenly, a lot of problems emerged. In fact, he went on to, I mean, he could sustain and went on to do the film. But a very interesting scene appears even before the film begins, even before the film narrates. The voice of Denzel Washington as Malcolm X, and just his voice, it says, I charge the white man. I charge the white man. And there's a series of montage that goes on. Suddenly the flag of USA, United States, the Union Jack, burns at the periphery. You know, it burns, it starts burning, right? And it becomes an X. The image of the flag becomes, it burns and becomes an X. Only the X image remains by the end of this 2.5 minutes, right? And the voiceover goes on, I charge, I charge, I charge. It gives a series of lists. And there's no Malcolm X and there's no Denzel Washington. There's just the voice. And there's a series of photographs, film footage, musical score that dramatize the ugly side of the American nightmare, which is slavery, segregation, and violence in 1960s, 1970s, 1950s, and to state that how this was foundational to the American gaze, or else the American dream. This was foundational for the American dream. Similarly, yet together with others, Spike Lee reconstructed the cinematic life of the radical leader Malcolm X. Obviously, you may know also that he was also part of Islam and very, I really with him. And of course, when this was done, this Calicut was one of the most prominent films that today is sort of the classics. Denzel was considered to be given the Oscar, but Denzel, of course, did not get the Oscar award because of this, and then it had to, another brilliant actor, white actor, but Robert De Niro for it. To actually conclude and think about this, first, opposing the Nazi gaze by looking back at it consciously would help all of us to gaze at the world without losing to it from where we are now, as we are. From the deconstruction of the American flag to the reconstruction of a nameless X, which has multiple possibilities in the history of America, one can look back to make radical meaning from our own films that are happening across. I want to just give 4 examples and want to end because then we can take questions. Brother Nagaraj Manjari in Marathi, in his film Fanry, hits a stone at the camera at the final climax. What is this stone that comes towards the camera? Brother Ranjit, Ranjit, is a very close friend, and right? Not his later films, I love his film Madras. The multicolored wall, which becomes a multicolored wall, at the heart of Madras, and it penetrates the power of caste in a cosmopolitan city of Madras. What does it mean? And they offer so much meaning. And much closely here, so much meaning can be made from the existential predicament of the many silenced lay people who would not even be a number. Rohit wrote, I'm a number, I'm a vote, but who cannot even be a number, a vote, and a thing, and who are merely waiting for a box of Unda, lost box of Unda, which never reaches. Oh, I'm sure all of you watch Unda film. Lost box of Unda which never reaches. Or much intimately to me, actually, presenting the struggles of a Sudani without a document. Struggles of a Sudani, a black man, Nigeria, but Sudani, without a document, as our own through football. Thank you, brothers Harshad and Zakaria, who is not here. So in the just hope of generating more stones, more multicultural walls, generative meanings of lost box of Undas, and more documentless players who play the game of life. Let me end this talk by quoting the words of Malcolm X, which Nelson Mandela in the film Malcolm X actually recites immediately is released out of the prison and he recites this. And I hope more films come on this. We declare our right on this earth to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means possible. By any means possible. Better be it art.